Dame Margaret Taylor Rutherford, DBE, was an English character actress who first came to prominence following World War II in the film adaptations of Noël Coward's Blithe Spirit and Oscar Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest. In 1963 she won the Best Supporting Actress Oscar and a Golden Globe for her role as the Duchess of Brighton in The VIPs. Rutherford was appointed Officer of the Order of the British Empire in 1961 and a Dame Commander in 1967. Early life. Margaret Rutherford's early life was overshadowed by tragedy. Her father was William Rutherford Benn, a journalist and poet. 1 month after his marriage to Florence N.E. Nicholson, on 16 December 1882, William Benn suffered a nervous breakdown and was admitted to Bethnal House Lunatic Asylum. Released to travel under family supervision, he murdered his father, the Reverend Julius Benn, a Congregational church minister, by bludgeoning him to death with a chamber pot, before he slashed his own throat with a pocket knife at an inn in Matlock, Derbyshire, on 4 March 1883. Following the inquest, William Benn was certified insane and removed to Broadmoor Criminal Lunatic Asylum. 7 years later, on 26 July 1890, he was discharged from Broadmoor, reunited with his wife and legally dropped his surname. Margaret Taylor Rutherford, the only child of William and Florence Rutherford, was born in 1892 in Balham, South London. Margaret's father's brother Sir John Benn, 1st Baronet, was a British politician, and her first cousin once removed was British Labour politician Tony Benn. Hoping to start a new life far from the scene of their recent troubles, the Rutherfords emigrated to Madras, India. However, Margaret was returned to Britain when she was 3 years old to live with her aunt, Bessie Nicholson, in Wimbledon, London, after her pregnant mother committed suicide by hanging herself from a tree. At 12 years old, Margaret shockingly learned that her father was not dead as she had been told all along by her relatives but, in fact, had been readmitted to Broadmoor Hospital in 1903, where he remained under care until his death in 1921. Her parents' mental afflictions along with a fear that she might succumb to similar maladies haunted Margaret Rutherford for the rest of her life and contributed to intermittent bouts of depression and anxiety. Margaret Rutherford was educated at Wimbledon High School, and, from the age of about 13, at Ravenscroft School, a boarding school at Sutton Avenue, Seaford. While there, she developed an interest in the theatre and performed in amateur dramatics. Upon leaving school, her guardian aunt, Bessie Nicholson, paid for her to have private acting lessons. Also, when Nicholson died, it was money from her legacy that allowed Rutherford to secure entry to the Old Vic School. In her autobiography, Rutherford called her Aunt Bessie her adoptive mother and one of the saints of the world. Stage career. Rutherford, a talented pianist who first found work as a piano teacher and a teacher of elocution, went into acting late in life, making her stage debut at the Old Vic in 1925, aged 33. As her celebrated spaniel jowls and bulky frame made the part of a romantic heroine out of the question, she soon established her name in comedy, appearing in many of the most successful British plays and films. I never intended to play for laughs. I am always surprised that the audience thinks me funny at all, Rutherford wrote in her autobiography. Rutherford made her first appearance in London's West End in 1933, but her talent was not recognised by the critics until her performance as Miss Prism in John Gielgud's production of The Importance of Being Earnest at the Globe Theatre in 1939. In 1941, Noël Coward's Blithe Spirit opened on the London stage at the Piccadilly Theatre, with Coward himself directing. Rutherford received rave reviews from audiences and critics alike for her lusty portrayal of the bumbling medium Madame Arcatia, a role which Coward had earlier envisaged for her. The theatre critic, Kenneth Tynan, once famously said of her performances, The unique thing about Margaret Rutherford is that she can act with her chin alone. Rutherford's quirky and energetic stage presence was such that she could deftly steal a scene even when playing relatively minor roles. Another theatrical success during the war years included her unexpected part as the sinister housekeeper Mrs. Danvers in Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca, at the Queen's Theatre in 1940. Her post-war theatre credits included Miss Prism in The Importance of Being Earnest again at the Haymarket Theatre in 1946 and Lady Bracknell when the same play transferred to New York in 1947. She played an officious headmistress in The Happiest Days of Your Life at the Apollo Theatre in 1948 and such classical roles as Madame Desmortes in Ring Round the Moon, Lady Wishfort in The Way of the World and Mrs. Candor in The School for Scandal. Her final stage performance came in 1966 when she played Mrs. Malaprop in The Rivals at the Haymarket Theatre, alongside Sir Ralph Richardson. Unfortunately, her declining health meant she had to give up the role after a few weeks' film career. Although she made her film debut in 1936, it was Rutherford's turn as Madame Arcatia in David Lean's film of Blithe Spirit that actually established her screen success. Her jaunty performance, cycling about the Kent countryside, head held high, back straight, and cape fluttering behind her, established the model for portraying that role thereafter. She was Nurse Carey in Miranda and the sprightly medieval expert Professor Hatton Jones in Passport to Pimlico, one of the famous Ealing comedies. She reprised her stage roles of the headmistress alongside Alistair Sim in The Happiest Days of Your Life and Miss Prism in Anthony Asquith's film adaptation of The Importance of Being Earnest. More comedies followed, including Trouble in Store with Norman Wisdom, The Runaway Bus with Frankie Howard and An Alligator Named Daisy with Donald Sinden and Diana Dawes. Rutherford then rejoined Norman Wisdom in Just My Luck and co-starred in The Smallest Show on Earth with Virginia McKenna, Peter Sellers and Leslie Phillips. She also joined a host of distinguished comedy stars, including Ian Carmichael and Peter Sellers, in the Bolting Brothers satire I'm All Right, Jack. In the early 1960s she appeared as Miss Jane Marple in a series of 4 George Pollock films loosely based on the novels of Agatha Christie. The films depicted Marple as a colorful character, respectable but bossy and eccentric. Authors Marion Shaw and Sabine Van Acker in their book Reflecting on Miss Marple complained that the emphasis on the dotty element in the character missed entirely the quietness and sharpness that fans admired in the novels. Still, it was Rutherford's outstanding performance in the role that set the mold for Marple on screen for years to come. The actress, then aged into her 70s, insisted on wearing her own clothes for the part and having her husband appear alongside her. In 1963 Christie dedicated her novel The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side to Margaret Rutherford in admiration. Though the novelist too was critical of the films for diverging from her original plots and playing dramatic scenes for laughs, Rutherford reprised the role of Miss Marple very briefly for a 30-second uncredited cameo appearance in the 1965 film The Alphabet Murders. In 1963 Rutherford won an Academy Award and Golden Globe as Best Supporting Actress for her performance as the absent-minded, impoverished, pill-popping Duchess of Brighton, the only light relief in Terence Rattigan's The VIPs, a film featuring a star-studded cast led by Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. She appeared as Mistress Quickly in Orson Welles' film Chimes at Midnight and was directed by Charlie Chaplin in A Countess from Hong Kong, starring Marlon Brando and Sophia Loren, which was one of her final films. She started work on The Virgin and the Gypsy, but illness caused her to be replaced by Faye Compton. Personal life. In 1945, Rutherford, 53, married character actor Stringer Davis, 46, after a courtship that lasted for 15 years. Davis's mother reportedly considered Rutherford an unsuitable match for her son and nuptials were postponed until Mrs. Davis's demise. Subsequently, the couple appeared in many productions together. Davis adored Rutherford, with one friend noting, "For him she was not only a great talent but, above all, a beauty." The ex-serviceman and actor rarely left his wife's side, serving Rutherford as private secretary, gopher and general dog's body. More importantly, he nursed and comforted her through periodic debilitating depressions. These illnesses, sometimes involving stays in mental hospitals and electric shock treatment, were kept hidden from the press during Rutherford's life. The Marple films capture something of the couple's public persona as projected in the media at the time. Their cozy domesticity, erratic housekeeping and almost childlike innocence and affection. In the 1950s, Rutherford and Davis unofficially adopted the writer Gordon Langley Hall, then in his 20s. Hall later had gender reassignment surgery and became Dawn Langley Simmons, under which name she wrote a biography of Rutherford in 1983. Famously, in the film, With Noël and I, Paul McGann's character was filmed reading about Hall's story in a tabloid newspaper during the breakfast cafe scene near the beginning of the film. Death. Rutherford suffered from Alzheimer's disease at the end of her life and was unable to work. Davis cared for his wife at their Buckinghamshire home until her death on the 22nd of May 1972, aged 80. Many of Britain's top actors, including John Gielgud, Ralph Richardson, Flora Robson and Joyce Grenfell, attended a memorial service of Thanksgiving at the Actors' Church, St. Paul's, Covent Garden on the 21st of July 1972, where 90-year-old Sybil Thorndike praised her friend's enormous talent and recalled that Rutherford had never said anything horrid about anyone. Rutherford and Davis are interred at the graveyard of St. James's Church, Gerrard's Cross, Buckinghamshire. A Blithe spirit is inscribed on the base of Margaret Rutherford's memorial stone, a reference to the Noël Coward play that helped launch her theatrical career. Theatre performances. A student at the Old Vic Theatre School, playing walk-ons and small parts in various shows, 1925-26. Understudy for Mabel Terry Lewis at the Lyric Theatre, Hammersmith, 1928. A season with the English Repertory Players at the Grand Theatre, Fulham, 1929. Little Theatre, Epsom, 1930. A season in Wahida at the Oxford Playhouse, 1930-31. A season in Wahida in Croydon, 1931. A season with the Greater London Players, 1932. Mrs. Reed in Wilde Justice at the Lyric Theatre, Hammersmith, 1933. Birthday, at the Cambridge Theatre, 1934. Aileen Solness in The Master Builder at the Embassy Theatre, Swiss Cottage, 1934. Lady Nancy in Harvey House at His Majesty's Theatre, 1935. Miss Flower in Short Story at the Queen's Theatre, 1935. Mrs. Palmay in Farewell Performance at the Lyric Theatre, Hammersmith, 1936. Aunt Bella in Tavern in the Town at the Embassy Theatre, Swiss Cottage, 1937. Emily Daverill in Up the Garden Path at the Embassy Theatre, Swiss Cottage, 1937. The Mother in The Melody That Got Lost at the Phoenix Theatre, 1938. Bijou Furs in Spring Meeting at the Ambassadors Theatre, 1938. Miss Prism in The Importance of Being Earnest at the Globe Theatre, 1939. Mrs. Danvers in Rebecca at the Queen's Theatre, 1940. Madame Arcatia in Blithe Spirit at the Piccadilly Theatre, 1941. Ensa Tour of France in Belgium, 1944. Queen of Hearts and White Queen in Alice in Wonderland at the Palace Theatre, 1944. Lady Charlotte Fair in Perchance to Dream at the Golders Green Hippodrome, 1945. Miss Prism in The Importance of Being Earnest at the Theatre Royal Haymarket, 1946. Lady Bracknell in The Importance of Being Earnest at the Royal Theatre, New York, 1947. Evelyn Whitchurch in The Happiest Days of Your Life at the Apollo Theatre, 1948. Madame Desmortes in Ring Round the Moon at the Globe Theatre, 1950. The title role in Miss Hargreaves at the Royal Court Theatre and New Theatre, 1952. Lady Wishfort in the Way of the World at the Lyric Theatre, Hammersmith, 1953. White Queen in Alice Through the Looking Glass at the Prince's Theatre, 1954. Duchess of Pontauban in Time Remembered at the Lyric Theatre, Hammersmith and New Theatre, 1954. Mirabelle Petersham in A Likely Tale at the Globe Theatre, 1956. Lady Wishfort in the Way of the World at the Saville Theatre, 1956. Lady Bracknell in The Importance of Being Earnest on UK Tour, 1957. The Happiest Days of Your Life and Time Remembered on Tour of Australia, 1957. Minerva Goody in Farewell, Farewell Eugene at the Garrick Theatre, 1959. Minerva Goody in Farewell, Farewell Eugene at the Helen Hayes Theatre, New York, 1960. Bijou Furs in Dazzling Prospect at the Globe Theatre, 1961. The Marquise in Our Little Life at the Noël Theatre in Valletta, Malta and the Pembroke Theatre, Croydon, 1961. Mrs. Candour in The School for Scandal at the Theatre Royal Haymarket, 1962. Mrs. Laura Partridge in The Solid Gold Cadillac at the Saville Theatre, 1965. Mrs. Heidelberg in The Clandestine Marriage at the Chichester Festival Theatre, 1966. Mrs. Malaprop in The Rivals at the Theatre Royal Haymarket, 1966. Filmography. Legacy. For One Night Only. Margaret Rutherford. Margaret Rutherford in drag tells her life story in cabaret form before an audience. Without Walls TV series 5 October 1993. Recordings. The English Pen International Centre included several readings of poems by Rutherford on a list entitled Library of Recordings.pdf. The works listed were A Charm Against the Toothache by John Heath Stubbs, O Country People by John Hewitt, Sedge Warbler, Women He Liked, Haymaking, Addlestrop, Will You Come, and Lights Out by Edward Thomas. 78s and singles All's Going Well, Nymphs and Shepherds. Phillips Records, PB 214.